If we look at our custom user details service class, we'll notice that within the load user by username method, we are retrieving an auto user from our repository, so from our database, and then we take the fields on that auto user object and we use it to populate the arguments in the user constructor. Now remember that user is a class provided by Spring, and if we inspect this class, we'll see that it implements the user details interface. The user details interface is created by Spring to act as an abstraction for a user throughout Spring Security. So this is basically the underlying user or principal class within the framework. And we see there are some methods on that interface: get authorities, get password, get username. Is the account expired? Is it locked? And we have to provide implementations of all of those methods if we want to extend the user details interface. What happens because there's this user details interface and then we have our auto user class is that we find ourselves going back and forth between auto user and the user details class. So within our appointment controller, here we actually have to pull out the username and then query our repository. Well, it would be a lot easier if we could just pull our actual auto user from the security context. So we're going to look at how we bridge that gap using our user details service and our auto user object. We're simply going to navigate to the auto user class, and we're going to now implement the user details interface, and then we'll add all of the unimplemented methods. And if we scroll down, we'll see that the first method that we must implement is the get authorities method. Granted authorities are really objects that represent application-wide permissions within our system. So these are going to grant a user permissions across a large number of operations. You're not going to see these granted authorities used like access control, where it's going to restrict our specific user to a certain appointment. These are more, can you access the add appointment feature within the application, something along that global scale, a little bit larger than just defining smaller access control. So we're going to return all of the authorities granted to this user. So we're going to use authority utils, and we're going to use the create authority list method. This will allow us to provide a string, so something like role_user, to this create authorities list method as an argument, and it returns us a collection of granted authorities. Now in this case, we're just going to return the role that is assigned to this user. We also need to provide some logic for the isAccount non-expired method, as well as the isAccount non-locked. A lot of these are really just checking to see whether or not the account is enabled. And we're just going to mock these up and put true. You may not always use these. You may have some logic to discern this information, or you may store this information in the database. But for our purposes, we're just going to return true for all of these so we don't get kicked out of the application. So at this point, our auto user class implements the user details interface provided by Spring. We can go to our custom user details service, and now instead of taking the fields from our auto user object and placing them in the constructor for the user, we can simply return the user that we pull from the repo. So there we just return the auto user object because it implements user details. And then what this allows us to do is it allows us to make our controller method more concise, because we're just going to pull out the principal here. So that user details object will be stored in the principal, and we can assign that to our auto user, and we'll take out that line. And now we just need to cast to the auto user object, And at this point, we're not hitting the database, so we saved a trip. What we've done by implementing the user details interface is we've allowed ourselves to store in the security context our application's specific representation of a user, which also conforms to the Spring security expectations of a user. So let's just restart our server now, and we'll run through a demonstration, and we'll see that everything works as we expected. So I'm going to navigate to the application, and I'm going to go to the appointments section, and I'm going to be prompted to sign in. I'm going to use Junior Doe one more time, so JR Doe and password. And then I'm going to create an appointment. Let's make it on Wednesday. And we'll say this is for a Subaru, and we'll say this is for a WRX, and we'll say it's 2016, and we need the tire changed. So we were able to use our user details interface, which is implemented by our auto user class, in order to make it more seamless with the Spring Security Framework.